Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery. Today you are going to learn the best script for real estate agents when they are cold calling. What technique actually works? Stick around so you can learn this script inside and out. It will go a long way in your business. So the best cold calling script for real estate agents, what is it? Well, there's a few different parts that make it up. First off, we have an opener, and then we move into a reason, and then we have what we call the wrap. So there are three components to this cold call. The final part is handling any objections. So we're gonna go through each one of those and break down exactly what to say and the reason for each. Now remember, what you can do here is you can adjust this for yourself. But whatever you do is when you adjust this, make sure that you understand what you're doing and you're testing. So if you change out a word or if you try a different line, make sure you're recording your calls, see how that landed, iterate and move forward. So you can adjust it, but make sure that you're adjusting it and you're testing. And if you have any recommendations, feel free to put them in the comments below. Let us know if there's anything that you would do differently or if you've cold called before in the past. Now let's jump into the opener. So this is the first thing that you say when you're cold calling. If you watch the first video in this series, you remember that there's a few different people that we might be cold calling. Maybe we're calling for sale by owners, expireds, maybe it's a lead that registered on a website or from a lead generation site, or it's these big fish. So remember the concept of these big fish, these big accounts. These accounts that can offer us a lot of real estate business over time. So we're gonna go through a couple examples of this. First off, we're gonna talk about, the standard real estate client and how you would go about making a cold call to them. Next, the second example is going to be one of these big fish. So if you're after a builder or a bank, a foreclosure lawyer, a house flipper, something like that that can offer you a lot of business over time. So we're going to look at a couple of different strategies. First off, the opener. The opener is the same no matter what. It goes like this. Hello, name. This is first name, last name with company. How have you been? That's it. That's all it is. So hello, John. This is Michael Montgomery with Renzo Real Estate. How have you been? So why does this work? First off, you're noticing we're using their name. Okay, we're making this personal. We're not using their last name, we're using their first name, simply because it's more personal. It's like a friend. Remember, we're trying to think of them like our best friend. Next, we say our name, first and last, with company. So that gives them some context, right? If we just say first name, that doesn't necessarily give them enough information. And in a way, it can be a little bit deceiving. It doesn't feel good. In their mind, they're trying to figure out, what is this all about? And we don't want them to think about, what is this all about? We want them to think about, how can this person help me? We don't want them to start to think about, how does this actually fit into my day right now? We want them to think about, how can this person be helping me? And then finally, we say, how have you been? So this is a great line. Reason being is it is what we call pattern interrupt. So they're used to hearing, how are you? Or do you have a few minutes? Both of those perform a lot worse than how have you been? So what you're doing here is pattern interrupt. You're making them think. And there's actually a 6.5 times higher likelihood of you turning this into a meeting by using that phrase versus is now a good time. Is now a good time just doesn't work when you're cold calling. Which then brings us to number 2. So this is the reason. This is really the meat of what it is that we're talking about. The reason has 4 parts. It has pique, like pique somebody's interest. And then we have pain, we have value plus proof, and then we have close. So these are the 4 components, and this is a very important structure, and it's really important that you follow this structure exactly. So let's talk about pique. So pique is piquing somebody's interest. I said we're going to go through a couple examples here. So we're going to look at an example if they were a buyer, say a lead that was sent to you through a lead generation website, or if it was somebody who registered on your website. And then we're going to also run an example of one of these big fish accounts. So the first one, let's say that the lead registered on your website. What you would do is you'd say, the reason for my call is I noticed you were looking at 123 Main Street and I have some news for you. If you are going after one of the big fish accounts, what I recommend is saying, I noticed the competition between you and competitor is absolutely fierce. Do you mind if I make an observation? So there you go, you have them on the hook. Now let's move forward to pain. This is the second step, and this is where we want to disclose something that doesn't necessarily feel good. So people either move towards pleasure or they move away from pain. What's more powerful? Moving away from pain is more powerful. So instead of letting them know how you're going to help them off the bat, you first want to indicate the pain. So for the real estate buyer, you might say something along the lines, well, the news unfortunately is this home has sold. It was an absolute beautiful home. It sold first day on the market. The buyer actually must have had the inside scoop. They went on the first day and they were able to put an offer in and it sold. So right there, you have now indicated pain. They have now realized, shoot, I missed that opportunity, but more than likely, they're not at a point where they're like, I was gonna write an offer on that anyways. But what should be going through their mind is, how do I avoid having this happen to me once I am out there and start looking? How about the big fish? How do we go about finding pain for that? Well, we'd probably move into it something like this. You know, you have a great product, but in order to beat that competitor, you need more than a great product, right? And so right there, we've now indicated pain. They have a great product, we've actually complimented them. However, they need something else in order to beat their competitor, which brings us to value and proof. So this is the value that you can offer to them in 1 to 2 sentences with a level of proof. So for the buyer, you might say something along the lines, you know, it can be really, really helpful to have a real estate agent who has their eye on the market, who's willing to make calls such as this to go find you a home that is perfect for you. In fact, I just helped a buyer get in this exact community last week. They couldn't be happier. So you've expressed a level of value that you have your eye on the market. You've also indicated that you're willing to go the extra mile, make calls such as you're doing right now in order to find them a home. And then finally, you're backing it up with proof. In fact, I have a buyer who just moved into this community last week. They are loving it. And you want to have a level of enthusiasm when you're talking about that. So that's the value and proof when it comes to the buyer. And how about these big fish? What sort of value and proof can we use in this case? Well, it works in a very similar manner. You'd probably say something along these lines. You know, you need a top real estate team who's willing to market things in a little bit of a different way and call people out of the blue, kind of like what I'm doing to you right now in order to find the buyers. In fact, I helped a home flipper do this exact same thing a few months ago, and they were able to sell 5 of their homes. So what did we do there? We had the value. We acknowledged the fact that this was a cold call, and I was like the grinder. I'm out there making the calls, and I'm gonna do the exact same thing for you. And then finally, we followed up with social proof. Now, what I do here is make sure that when you're using the social proof, you can use a company in the same industry. So if you're talking about a builder, maybe you want to talk about a builder you've worked with in the past. But if that hasn't happened, that's perfectly fine. Talk about a customer, a client, a buyer, a seller, whatever that might be. Just talk about some social proof that you can use in order to get the deal done. So if you didn't want to go down that road, you might say, well, I helped a seller last week. We used a very crazy video in order to attract buyers. I made some cold calls like this. We got the deal done. They paid over asking price. That works perfectly fine as well. So now you've hit what we call the value and proof. So next we're at the close. And this closing technique is extremely powerful. It works throughout any stage of the real estate transaction. And I've seen it work from cold calling to securing listings to securing buyers and beyond. And it goes like this. There's 2 parts to it. You ask 2 questions. If one question results in a no, then you have a follow-up question. This is how it works. Does it make sense for X so that Y? Does it make sense for us to get together for 15 minutes so that I can learn a little bit more about your buying criteria and I can make sure to send you the right deals? For the big fish, you'd probably say something along these lines. Does it make sense for us to get together for 15 minutes on Zoom just so I can learn a little bit more about what your needs are right now and we can see if we can put something together in the future? Perfect, that's it. So that's question 1. If they say yes to that, perfect. Go book the meeting. In the case that they say no to that, you have question 2. And this is a very important question. So the second question, if they say no to the meeting, you simply say, okay, name, what's a great next step then? And then pause. And have them propose the next step. This works so well. You can do this even at the closing table when you're trying to secure a listing. Does it make sense for me to send the listing paperwork off to you tonight so that we can get the ball rolling with your listing? If they were to say, no, I need to think about it, or whatever that might be, you can then move into the next question. Okay, John, so what would be a great next step then? And then have them bring up the next step. This is such a great closing technique, and there's a reason for each one of the words in there. You're not actually forcing them to do anything. It's not confrontational. It's very collaborative. It works great. So there you go. Those are the 3 steps. Now, what happens when they say, I'm not interested? Because the objections that come from cold calls are typically somewhere around I'm not interested. So it can sound like this: I'm not interested. I don't have time for that. I'm all set. I already have an agent. I'm good. Whatever that might be. So those are objections that we're going to talk about now. What you're going to see is we're not talking about objections that say, I've just bought a home, or we're not buying a home anymore. Those aren't objections. They're actually disqualifying themselves. So at that point in time, you want to thank them for their time. You want to let them go. Do so in an exciting, friendly manner, but let them go because they have disqualified themselves. However, if they were to say, I'm not interested, or have an agent right now, or we're all set, something along those lines, at this point in time, you can move into the objection handler for I'm not interested. So the best objection handler when it comes to I'm not interested, there's a few different ways that you can approach this. Down in the description below, you can always go check out a few different approaches to this. But one of the better ones that I've found is what I call downgrading the ask. So you've asked something, and then you want to kind of make it sound like you're compromising. So first thing you do when it comes to an objection is you always agree with them. You always say, you know what, I get it. I totally agree with you. You know what, I probably wouldn't be interested either. If you were interested, you'd be calling me right now. So I understand. That's exactly how you want to open up the objection handler, especially with any objection for that matter. It doesn't even necessarily need to be I'm not interested, but with objections, it's great to agree. That in itself is a pattern interrupt, right? They're not prepared for you to agree. So the next step is downgrading the ask. So this is where you take what you were asking for and you make it simpler. You make it less of a commitment for them. For example, let's say that you were talking to that buyer and the buyer, you were asking for a 30-minute meeting to learn more about their buying criteria. You'd simply downgrade the ask. You'd simply say, you know, I understand 30 minutes probably sounds like a long time. Why don't we get together for 15 minutes over Zoom? At least that way I can learn a little bit more about your criteria. I might be able to send you a few properties. Would that be worth a couple minutes of your time? And then you pause. If it was the big fish, maybe you say something along the lines of, you know, I understand 30-minute meeting in person seems like a lot. Why don't we jump on Zoom for 15 minutes? If nothing else, you'll at least learn a few new marketing techniques that you can use with your agent if you'd like. Would that be worth a few minutes of your time? And then you pause there. So what you're doing is you're downgrading that ask, you're making it easier for them to say yes to, and you're not asking for the exact same thing again. Again, in the description, if you'd like, there's a few more objection handlers for this specific objection. However, I found that works extremely well. So finally, we have the wrap. So this is what ties it all together and puts a bow on it. So you've gone through your opener, you've gone through your reasons, you've handled any objections that you've needed to handle, and now you're at the wrap. So this is how you wrap it up. So there's 2 things that can happen here. The first thing is if they've said yes to a meeting. The second thing is if they've said no. So after you've gone through your objection handlers, if they've still said no. So if they say yes, the first thing you want to do is be excited, be pumped the fact that you're going to meet, and then say that you promise to send them something. So for the buyer, for example, what you may say is, I am really looking forward to seeing you next Wednesday over Zoom. It should be really fun. You know, I promise to send you a few other properties before then, just so you have an understanding of what's going on in the market. I'll send those to you, and I can't wait to see you next Tuesday, Thursday, whatever that might be. So what you're doing here is you're making a promise. The reason is your follow-up email after this call will contain whatever it is you promised. So you'll deliver on your promise. You'll already be building a level of credibility with them using this. So you always want to wrap with a promise. So that's in the case of somebody saying yes to the meeting. What do we do in the case of somebody saying no to the meeting? So we've handled the objections. We haven't got anywhere. They just kept saying no. So the way that we handle this during the wrap is quite simple. We simply want to ask for permission to stay in touch. And it sounds something like this. You know, no problem whatsoever. Thank you so much for your time. Would you mind if we just stayed in touch over the course of the next few months, just in case I see something that comes up that could work? Or if you're in the event of a big fish, you might say, or if I come across some cool marketing strategy that could be of use, would that be of value to you? Most of the time they're going to say yes. If they say no, don't contact me, perfect. Then you move that person out, you don't have to contact them again. But finally during the wrap, if you didn't get the meeting or you didn't get the next step, you always want to ask for permission to stay in touch. And then you put them in your database and you start to follow up with them and you nurture them, which is where most people will go. That first time you call, most people will move, as far as that wrap is concerned, towards just staying in touch. And that permission to stay in touch means you're going to follow up with them over and over again, typically around 4 times. And at that point in time, they will typically say yes to the meeting at that time. After 4 times, that's typically when people will start to agree to the meeting. So you don't want to be annoying, you don't want to be calling them every single day after this, but you do want to establish a cadence. And depending on their desire and what they're looking for, so if they're looking to buy a home in a month, I'm going to be calling them within the next couple of days. If they're looking to buy a home in 6 months, I'll probably give them a week or so, and then I'll follow up with them at that point in time. The other thing about permission is when you're asking for permission to follow up, you always want to ask for their email too. And that way you have more than one way of staying in touch with them. If you don't have their email at this point in time, you want to ensure you get their email so that you can stay in touch through that method as well. So there you go, that's the script. We have the opener, we have the reason, we handle any objections we need to handle, and then we have the wrap. Different ways of going about doing this if you're dealing with a buyer or a seller, or if you're dealing with one of these big fish accounts. That's how you work your way through the perfect script for cold calling in real estate. Thanks again for watching this video. We'll see you in the next lesson.